Well, hello everyone. My name is Carrie Varela, and I'm so happy to be here with Michaela Daystar and Bronwen Logan, and we are the Reiki Women Podcasts. I have been gone for the last couple of weeks and missed out on some really good conversations, which I listened to the episodes, and I just spent about 2 days just wishing I could have said something and offered my these episodes. Um, Such good episodes, such a good discussion that we're having here on the Reiki Women podcast. So I hope that today's episode brings you a lot of thoughtful moments and stirring conversations with other Reiki women. Today we're going to talk about our hope for Reiki, our hope for the future of Reiki, and where we see Reiki in a few years from now, and the generations of practitioners after us. So, who would like to begin? What is your hope for the future of Reiki?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, we were just saying, I don't know, in a sense. I mean, there are things, of course, I think that we do hope. For me, it's in line with a lot of things in the world. And I think that's probably why, because it's such a bigger story, isn't it? It's a bigger story than just the system of Reiki. It is the story of how we communicate with one another across the globe, and it feels like if we were to bring the Reiki precepts, for example, into a bigger picture, if they became a societal norm, what sort of a society would we live in? So, I mean, there's lots of little things that we could talk about. I think when I first thought about it, I thought, oh, bringing it into the mainstream. Well, that's what I mean, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's more than bringing it into hospitals. It's more than bringing it into schools, or it's really how we think about our lives, and how we imagine that we should all be together, and how we can work with the problems that we find ourselves in. And at at this exact moment, there's the whole thing going on in the Ukraine. And there's this thing where Russia is saying, or Putin is saying, he'd like to use nuclear weapons, possibly. And then, America is sort of responding with, or Biden, it must be, someone in America is responding with, well, if you do that, basically so will we. And so we live in this world where, revenge and the idea of pain and anger just building upon each other really are our normal societal ways of being together, I think. It seems like. So I'm going to put that out there for discussion, and see what you guys think.
Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of rooting us in a wider lens to begin with, and really inviting that shift in perspective. Well, the holding of both perspectives, that this is from the inside out, right? So you started with, what if all of us lived our lives as an embodiment of the precepts, or infused the precepts into our life? That's an individual choice, and that's a community choice, and a community passing on of knowledge on a small scale. But then what does that add up to over time? And then bringing it to, really deeply intractable global conflicts and things that have been, brewing and moving on for a very long time. It can be really easy to look at those things as just inevitable, or like there's not anything that can change that. Like that's just, too big for us to think about impacting.
Yeah.
And yet, the best way I think that we can impact it is exactly that, is to bring something into our life that has us realign our relationship to other people, to ourselves, to the planet, to community. And the Reiki precepts are a really elegant, accessible, simple, and very powerful place to rest our attention if we're wanting to do something like that. it's something that is so simple that it's often overlooked, even inside of the Reiki community. We've talked about that before, how, sometimes the precepts are seen as almost kind of on the side, as opposed to the absolute centerpiece of this practice. And they're concepts that show up in many different practices, many different traditions, something like, the spirit of the precepts. And we can see how that changes individuals, families, and communities when that is engaged with seriousness. And we can see how that changes school communities, how that changes religious communities, how it changes our families when we do that. And so I appreciate holding that, this is very personal and it's also very universal when we think about what we hope for the future of this practice. And, part of what comes up for me when I ask myself that question is that I hope to see, first of all, within the Reiki community, a recommitment to the precepts as the centerpiece of this practice, and a recommitment to self-practice as the purpose of this practice. And, recommitment to really understanding what the reason for this practice was in the first place. And then from there, seeing the interconnections with other practices, that it's actually part of a worldwide net of human impulse to turn ourselves inward and become better people so that the world rippling out from us can be better. Now, that's a very big kind of vague answer, right? But sometimes it helps to start with that large vision, and then, okay, so how do we make that real in our daily life? Because that's the other piece, is that if we're looking at this as something outside of day to day, something so big or challenging that it's outside of our day to day, then we can't make any action on it. And so how do we make that real, one moment to the next, one decision to the next? That's where I would start.
So much to think about. And I really do love and honor this conversation, because I think when we're a little bit more cognizant about what the future is, or what we see in our hearts, and what we want for the community of Reiki, for the system of Reiki, it's just that much easier to manifest it. But I echo a lot of what you guys are saying. While I was gone, I was teaching at a yoga festival in Colorado, and at the yoga festival, I got to lead a talk on Reiki. And one of the things I asked this audience, about 25 people, was, how much of your mental space is caught up in worry and anger? And I saw a lot of nodding heads. A lot of people were like, it was profound for them to think about, like, well, how much time in my day do I spend caught up in worry and anger? And so we had a really robust conversation about how the Reiki precepts can kind of guide our way out of a state of worry or anger. And I know for myself, when I've been in those states and just thinking about, something that I'm really angry about, is sometimes I'll be in that place of do not anger, and, doing whatever I can do to kind of soften around the anger, release the anger, acknowledge it. But I also have to move my way through the other precepts too. And one of the ones that I think is really helpful is, well, all of them are really helpful, but when I'm really angry, there's also something about tuning into being true to your way, which I feel like kind of helps guide the anger. It helps me understand where my boundaries might have been crossed, or where I feel like I have to be true to myself, yet, clear about how I'm speaking and communicating to others in a way that causes as least harm as possible. And then finally coming to like the compassion piece and the kindness piece, and like, no matter where you are in the spectrum of all of the precepts, that like you can bedrock yourself or ground yourself in the thought of, even if I can't release this worry today, I can still be compassionate to myself. I can still be compassionate to the situation. And anyway, so I thought that was so useful for the people in the audience, and just for myself has been part of my process. But I think certainly, like, giving people the idea of the Reiki precepts just without the container of Reiki, I think that's challenging because I think a lot of people feel very attached to their worry and anger. So giving them more resources, to expand their well-being out of those states of being
I think
is
that's,
a huge thing. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
just thinking that's so true what you just said, because I think that a lot of people see themselves as an angry person, or that there is some sort of that they have the right to be angry. It's sort of like a different way of it's this thing that's what they might consider to be true to their way. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not really, it's, I guess it's seeing yourself in a way that perhaps when you haven't looked at yourself, when you haven't spent time thinking about yourself. And it's a bit like a person saying, I had someone come to a class, a young guy came with his girlfriend, and, halfway through the class, he said to me, "Oh, so does this mean I can't have fun anymore?" And we've talked about this, and it's that thing of, well, what is fun? What, and yeah, exactly. And some people might find that it's enjoyable to express their anger, or they think that it's enjoyable to express their anger because that's the pathway that they know.
Yeah.
And they don't know other pathways.
Yeah. It's really, it's an interesting, endlessly interesting conversation around our relationship to these emotions that we have that are, that are there in our life for a reason, that developed evolutionarily for a reason, and that can serve us really well, and that can also serve us really poorly depending on our relationship to them. And, you said something interesting a minute ago that kind of piqued my attention. You said, that people think they have a right to their anger. And I would say we do have a right to our anger. We have a right to our fear. We have a right to our joy. We have a right to any feeling, any emotion that naturally arises in our being. We have a right to it. It's ours.
Yeah.
And the way that we relate to it, the way that we express it, the way we work with it matters a lot, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I absolutely could have a right to my anger. I do. And I can work with it. I can relate to it in a way that causes me great harm, right? That idea of identifying with our anger. I am an angry person as who I am, right? That's a dangerous mindset, right? Not only for the dis-ease it can build up inside of our body, but of course also in the behavior that we're going to express. And so there's a certain self-responsibility to saying I have a right to my anger, I have a right to my fear, and I have a responsibility to be in right relationship with it, right? Which can look a lot of different ways. And if we work with it, for example, through a system like Reiki, over a period of time, we absolutely can get to a point where that anger, that fear moves through us so seamlessly that it doesn't stick at all, right? We might not even notice it. We might get the information that it's there to give us without having to feel all the physiological sensations that it gives us. That takes a long time. There's a lot of steps in between, my anger rages out of control or my fear rages out of control, and it passes through me without sticking, right? Gives me information that I need and then moves right on through without sticking. There's a lot of steps in between, and every step that we take inside of there matters, right? Any moment that we have one of those feelings come up and have engaged in a practice enough times that we can automatically employ that practice to move that emotion through so that we don't act on it in a way that hurts ourselves or other people matters a lot, right? And it's all of those moments adding up that get us either into, big trouble, global level trouble, as you brought up in the beginning, or finding different pathways through that potential trouble. It's like sometimes I think it seems a little bit utopian to talk in those terms, but it is actually true. Like it is actually
Yeah.
how cultural shift works.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we look at the early 1900s, when Mikao Usui was actually putting the system of Reiki together, we can see that the idea of these Reiki precepts existed in many different places. And hands-on healing was, Tenehiro was really popular. Meditative practice was popular. So these were societal norms to a greater degree, much greater degree than they are today, both in Japan and obviously in our worlds. So we could definitely be there. We could definitely go there. I guess it's a point of how to get there, you know?
Well, I think, I think it points to a few other things that I'm hopeful for in the system and the future of Reiki is that we kind of come together as a bigger community and create a few more guidelines on how Reiki could be practiced. It's not rules necessarily, but just guidelines, but also how Reiki should be, how you should be trained in Reiki, what goes into a good quality Reiki training, whether or not, just creating more structures around doing it in person or online. Pre-recorded Reiki courses, I feel like are something that I don't think serve the Reiki community well. But as there's becomes more awareness and education and consensus amongst Reiki practitioners about really what is Reiki, then there's not as much disagreement amongst us. I think that there's more that common denominator, that common baseline and grounding, and from that we can do much more for the world. So I think that's very important to me. And I think some of it is also just creating a greater sense of responsibility as Reiki practitioners to really represent Reiki well. And sometimes I think Reiki is not really represented well, by courses online, study Reiki for $25, all 3 levels for $25, something like that. I think that gives somebody a sense that the knowledge that we share as Reiki practitioners, the time that we share with our students, and the Reiki itself is not very valuable. Whereas my mindset there is that Reiki is invaluable, that the resources, the insight that a Reiki practitioner can share is invaluable as well, that our time also has value, and it's important to value ourselves well. It's exciting to see Reiki in hospitals, and I think that I hope to see more of that. But with my knowledge of Reiki in hospitals is that often it's done by volunteers, and I think it would be wonderful to get to a place where people who are offering solace and comfort to seriously ill patients, or in cancer units, or in another capacity, should be paid a reasonable fee for their time, for driving there, spending some gas. And that also kind of raises the vibe of Reiki, to be given and as a valuable service, and in that exchange, a monetary exchange that feels equivalent of the practitioner's time and energy. So those are some smaller things that I like to see Reiki shift out of. But ultimately, when I come to my practice as a teacher of Reiki, well, let's put it in a different frame. So I was talking at this yoga festival about tantric yoga, which was like the period of tantric yoga began 14 generations ago, from the 6th to 13th century. So 14 full generations ago. And I feel very fortunate and lucky that, as somebody 14 generations beyond that particular time frame, and the philosophy that came and sprung from tantric yoga, that I could be a practitioner of it today. That's really my goal as a Reiki teacher as well, is to share this beautiful knowledge of Reiki that came to us about 1 generation ago. And preserve it in such a way, teach it in such a way that it's clean and relevant to my students, but also something that they can replicate for many generations of Reiki practitioners beyond me. And I think that that's something that's really being lost right now. There's so much appropriation happening within Reiki trainings, so much knowledge being added in, so much knowledge being taken out. And I know we're having a lot of shaking heads. I'm sure you guys want to talk about this, but my question is like, if you leave out something really specific in a Reiki course, or just because you don't agree with it or you don't understand it very deeply, that missing piece could be really fundamental to somebody else. And so really being mindful of, what is the baseline amount of knowledge that we should be imparting to our students in a Reiki course, but how do we make that a little bit more universal and consistent for everyone?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's sort of been my purview. Is that the right word? So I mean, that's always something, just, we've talked about that, creating, finding out what the elements were that were the base of the system, noting that and teaching according to that. And actually, I guess I don't go on many forums and that sort of thing. So in one way, possibly, I'm not aware of some of the things that are happening today in the system of Reiki. But I had a feeling that, since in the last, 20 or so years, that things have actually improved rather than degenerated. And because I know when we were putting together this idea of, the 5 elements of the system of Reiki, simply by, not creating them ourselves, simply by observing what was there, that nothing like that existed. And there wasn't any structure of what a course might be for people of any lineage. Because the idea is that those 5 elements work across all lineages because they are a commonality. But on the other hand, for example, we don't really teach poetry. I thought that was very interesting what you were just saying. What if we leave something out? What happens then? And I know Michaela's done courses with poetry. I will talk about poetry, and I do like to, if possible, include, a Joshinho meditation, which includes poetry, because that was a part of the original teachings. And I think people think that, that's not relevant today. And yet it is a different way for us to feel or understand the system of Reiki. So maybe we should be definitely teaching that. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question.
It's an interesting question, and it gets messy really quickly because there is such a long, because what we have is a very long tradition of a misunderstanding of the system, right? It came into the West already an altered form from its original. It was altered further for intentional reasons that made a lot of sense culturally and historically at the time. It's how we got to keep it in the West, given the time period that it came into the country and the circumstances, and then came into America and to other places, but particularly here, where we have this kind of melting pot ideology where you bring things in from all the places where you have roamed and pillaged and colonized, and you boil them down and make something new and fresh, or maybe something old, but interpret it the way that that works best for you. And so that process has been happening for a very long time. And so when I think first of all, Bronwen, that you're right, that there is much more of an understanding that that form is different than the original form, but it's not widespread. I routinely am having conversations with people who, where I'll start to speak to some of these things and they're like, I had no idea. I have a student in my year program right now who was like, I had no idea that this was what Reiki was about. I thought it was just about healing other people. And I wasn't even interested in that. But for some reason, I felt like I needed to take this class. And I'm like, well, that's amazing because that's totally, we actually are very well aligned. But there's more understanding of it. And then there's this messy place where then there's reappropriation of it, right? And so we'll have, people using the terminology of Shoden, Okuden, Shimpiren and applying that to a very new age Western Reiki form,
Yeah.
right? And or like bringing in, Jushin Kuk Yaho, but layering that in without, just kind of making it work for the Western form. And so, in alignment, Carrie, with what you were sharing, I think that, starting with an acknowledgement, widespread acknowledgement, that the Western form of Reiki is a different system of practice than the original form, and that's okay, right? There's a lot of benefit that people have, you know, found in their life from the Western form, but it is different. It has different understandings of what even is happening. I just saw a colleague of mine, had a video in the marketing for his Reiki 1 classes coming up, and just a simple "what is Reiki" video, just answering the question, "what is Reiki?" And I'm like, man, I respect you a lot, but I totally disagree about your definition just on this like very simple question of what is Reiki.
Yeah.
And so, I would love to see, and I hope to see a greater like acknowledgement and understanding that we're working with different systems of thought. We're working with different, you know, sets of goals, and we're working with systems that have, one form that has a lot of different things mixed together, and one form that had things mixed together, but from a particular time and place. And I think that acknowledgement would bring us a long way, because it would engender more curiosity from people when they're learning Reiki to dig in to more detail about where the elements are coming from. Because I remember when I first started training in Reiki, learning the symbols and mantras, which I now know there was a lot of misinterpretation of them in that, learning different parts of the system, and just not really having an understanding of where they came from, and not questioning, why am I learning these very old Japanese symbols that I don't know where they come from other than Japan, and I'm learning that alongside the chakra system as if they're one and the same. I wasn't curious. I mean, I wasn't curious enough about it, and there was nobody saying, hey, there's been changes to the system over time. And so I think that acknowledgement would go a long way. And if students start asking those questions, then teachers will have to seek out the answers.
Okay.
And conversely, if teachers seek out the answers on the front end, then they're going to provide a much stronger foundation for a student's learning. Because it's not to say that it's never okay to learn the system of Reiki or another system and then bring other things alongside of it. We've talked about this before, but understand what those things are and why they're coming together, and does it actually make sense to bring them together in the same space? I think those kinds of points of awareness and curiosity would go a long way in this, and just accepting like there is different systems of practice that view Reiki in very different ways, and we want to be able to make good choices about which systems will actually align with who we want to be.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and I think it points to this whole idea of like, if we're talking about something that's universal, a universal energy, there's this a mind trap that I can get stuck in is, well, then it's going to look the same for you, it's going to look the same for me, it's going to look the same, and it just doesn't. And we don't think like, we can be in this kind of universal place of oneness, but have really strong differences of opinion and still hold that together in a community. And so I think, no matter whoever's listening, no matter what your worldview is around Reiki, I certainly hope to see, though, that like we come together a little bit more, cross the bridge between our differences, and find more commonality about values and things that we share. And for me, one of that is, seeing that, if Reiki is universal, um, bringing it more to people of color, to different types of folks, and allowing more space for those, authentic moments of connection, also those authentic moments where culture and lifestyle and, um, you know, uh, a race and a gender and all of those things might divide us in some senses, but still finding that sense of unity between us, I think is really important. And I like to see Reiki be less woo and more integrative.
Well,
But I go ahead, go ahead.
Carrie, I was just thinking, there was that other aspect to this that was that's something that you'd be very interested in, and that is, our connection with our environment and what that means to how we are living and how our grandchildren will be living, and how the system of Reiki could actually help us to see our world differently, to feel our world differently, to, if we're understanding that we are interconnected with it all, then that, we come from it, we go back to it, we are just a part of it rather than something that's riding it,
Yeah.
and then if that understanding, if we could have that deeper understanding of who we are as human beings on this planet, which I do think the system of Reiki can help us to experience through the practices, then we will possibly treat this world a little differently as well.
That's such an essential piece, Bronwyn, and something that I continue to move closer and closer to is, and just the reminder that the system of Reiki starts with our connection to the earth, and it starts with our understanding of ourself as intimately the same as the natural world around us. Not better, not worse, not above, part of. And, that is that essential aspect of beginning with grounding and beginning with our a felt awareness of our rootedness on this planet that gave us life. And that kind of awareness over time absolutely does change the way that we behave in relationship to the earth. And, as I build that much more intentionally into my teaching, it's something that folks are naturally kind of reporting back, the choices that they're making as they live their life in relationship to the earth, to the natural world, to sustainability, to food choices, that it naturally flows from this simple act of paying attention and having a felt embodied experience of our connection with nature. And, one of the things that I feel really leery about and sometimes disappointed about, when we see some of the different ways that the system of Reiki is, being expressed in these other forms, is this emphasis on kind of leaving the earth, this kind of ascension perspective that that the goal is to be up and away, right? And to get away from here. And we can see from the perspective of a modern world. I mean, I know that's a concept that's shown up, lots of times in human history, but looking at it from a modern perspective, back to our relationship with fear and with anger, a lot of people are very fearful about the state of the world for good reason. We are very aware as a people of how precarious our existence is on this planet, in a way that, is probably unique in history. And I can understand the impulse to want to have an out, right? To want to have an escape route out of it. And I'm so grateful to be cultivating my practice of Reiki in a way that says the escape route is escape from the fear. We're not going to escape this planet, and we shouldn't want to. We should want to be in deeper, more harmonious relationship with her. And that's going to involve and require us to deal with a lot of uncomfortable stuff, right? You know, I led a 21-day practice where we basically took Joshin Kokyoho and we kind of created a modified version that had us really pay attention to breathing with trees and being in the reciprocation of breath with trees and with plant life. And just as an experiment, like how will this impact us and our relationship with nature, with our own, you know, how we feel, whatever. What happens when we spend a good period of time really focusing our attention on this just fundamental relationship we have with plant life, that we share breath with them, right? And it was shockingly powerful for this group of folks to move through. And it took us to some really uncomfortable places because people were like, I am all of a sudden so aware of how the drought is impacting all the trees in my neighborhood. There's a fire going, you know, a few miles from here, and I can just feel how much pain that's causing to the plant life around here, right? And instead of letting that be a deterrent to connection, it was like, let's lean more into that, because we have a system of practice that gives us strategies for dealing with that discomfort, right? Joshin Kokyoho itself as a practice is profoundly effective at allowing us to move discomfort out of our system so we can stay focused, we can continue paying attention to whatever that is. And so, you know, hopes for the future of the system of Reiki, you know, includes a widespread awareness of that's what's possible. And that's, again, our responsibility to allow this practice to reconnect us with the world that is really scary right now, and that we feel a lot of hopelessness, a lot of guilt and shame around the treatment of the earth. And it is understandable to want to look away from all of that, but we cannot. And this system gives us a really powerful and supportive pathway to examine our relationship to all of that and to make choices from the basis of that relationship. And that has changed my life, and I see it impacting the people that I work with every day. Yeah.
I love how you brought that up, because I think it's such a relevant question, and it speaks to kind of maybe like the kind of end result, really, of being with the energy of Reiki for a long period of time as it starts to shift us and transform our own perspectives. But I think for me too, like, I don't know, my journey through Reiki, like at first it was all like, you know, crown chakra awakening and this really powerful transcendent energy, feeling connected to angels and life on other planets, and stretching myself out to the universe. And I still feel that Reiki, there's a big part of that, that I have a fondness for. I think that maybe there was something really relevant and important for me to explore in that. But, ultimately it circled back to like, none of that helps me be a better person. None of that helps me in my day-to-day life. None of that helps me be more human and be more embodied into who I am and who I choose to show up to as in today. And so I think, and I think I've seen it a lot, as you were mentioning, Michaela, in the spiritual community of Reiki, is sometimes people, this idea that I don't belong here, I'm a starseed from another planet, like all of those things I see regularly talking about. But I think when we foster this wound of difference within ourselves, and we might feel different, emotionally, energetically, the way we look, from other people. But if we just kind of sit with that wound of difference all the time, it can bring up, it just only creates more separation. Yeah. And I think Reiki ultimately is about healing that separation. And, one of the things that I do in my business that I feel like is at the core of what message I want to bring to the world is that we can make a bigger difference together. And that and you should be aware, as a Reiki practitioner, as a spiritual practitioner, that you make a big difference. You make a huge difference in the lives of people. And you think about something like, Thich Nhat Hanh or the Dalai Lama, these spiritual leaders, they have created such a big difference in the world.
Yeah.
And I think as spiritual practitioners, we're part of that. I feel that call to make a bigger difference, bigger than my skin, bigger than who I am. And so one of the ways I try to make a difference for my business is I donate $1 for every Reiki session I provide to the World Wildlife Fund. And I'm actually inviting a lot of other Reiki practitioners to join me in that pledge, because I feel like if I can donate $500 a year, which is typically about how much I can generate through my business towards the World Wildlife Fund. And if, Bronwen, you did that, and Michaela, you did that, and everybody else did that within the system of Reiki, can you imagine the difference we could make?
Yeah.
And I choose World Wildlife Fund because I think it's a universal thing. There's, people, places, and animals that are endangered everywhere on the planet. So it's not something that happens just in Australia or United States or in Japan. It's everywhere. And I think if we could come together, there's like over a million Reiki masters out there in the world, and if we could come together and meaningfully make a change or make a difference or make some more statements together about how we want the world to look, I don't know. I can't imagine what a difference that would make. And that's always my vision for the future too, that I offer and share with you all.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean that opportunity to make those small steps, feels like a big part of the theme that we're working with here, right? What are those small things that we do that add up? And yeah, thinking about where can we send resources is a really powerful one. Around whatever it is that's most important to each person. And one other thing I wanted to circle back to, Carrie, when you're talking about the experiences that you had, thinking more up, right? Space, that's second diamond work, right? It's not that those things aren't important or included, right? Like that's where you head next. It's just that we often want to jump there, or we want to jump to the heart first. My first kind of long-term spiritual practice was almost exclusively about working with the heart space. And that was really powerful and really important. But what I realized is that I started to have some real heaviness, and like I started to feel really off kilter after a period of time. And when I started, reading your work, Bronwen, to be honest, and learning about the importance of working the three diamonds in order from Hara, earth, body, stability, foundation, rootedness, groundedness, and from that stable place, when you're ready to then move to that reaching place, that out beyond ourselves, all the way out to space, wherever we want to go with that, but keeping that tether, keeping that anchor to our home here. Mm-hmm. And then when those feel harmonized, then coming to the heart, because now the heart, which needs an incredible amount of space, right, is well supported in expanding. And so that just ended up feeling like a much more supportive system, and it allows us to operate in all of those realms, but in a way that well, at least for me, feels much more healthy and sustainable.
Isn't it interesting? Yeah. I mean, when you were saying about the angels too, I know exactly where you're coming from. I mean, I've been to angel workshops in my time and all sorts of things. And, it's fun and enjoyable. I get the thing like, how does that make me a better person? I did understand that question. And it's a really good one to ask. And yet at the same time, I do think that it's all just a part of us, which is exactly what Michaela's saying, isn't it? I mean, all that angelic stuff, you are an angel, you're multiple angels, you are, so it's seeing that within ourselves. And it's almost that thing like we are not worthy. Yeah. I'm not worthy, so therefore I have to reach out and make, find this beauty outside of myself.
Yeah.
But the beauty is in here. And, which brings us back to what we're talking about at the beginning, that, finding that beauty within ourselves and allowing it to shine, and how that can change the world. it's like the cliche, and we do use it within the system of Reiki, but I can't get away from it, that I am the universe and the universe is me. It's that small me being this, but also being all of this at the same time, which is everything I feel like we've been talking about today. And it's manifested in our practice of Joshin Kokyoho. So we're breathing in, me, human being, me, breathing into my body and breathing out, and recognizing that what's coming in and out is actually me just being a part of absolutely everything. So not separate at all. And it's like we need to understand about ourselves as the small person, but also as this magnificent thing that we're also a part of and exist in, and how they are the same thing but can also be seen as different.
Yeah. I think that's a lovely place for us to land today.
It is such a lovely place. So, well, honoring Bronwen, all that you've brought to the system of Reiki, Michaela, all of your beautiful insights that you share, my own insights that we share. I know that, and all of you who are listening as Reiki women, all of the things that you bring to the system of Reiki. And I think that we're all the hope of Reiki. We're all the guardians of this beautiful energy, and we are going to take it into this next generation and serve many people in beautiful ways with it. So I hope you feel that spark in your heart.
Yeah.
So blessings to everyone. We can't wait to speak more with you next week. And if you have any comments, thoughts, experiences that you'd love to share with us, please feel free to pop them in the comments. Please feel free to share this episode to somebody who needs to listen to it. And until we see you again, have a wonderful day.
That's love.